That's roughly 40,000 years ago. The sun is dropping behind the tree line and you're still half a mile from the fire. There's no streetlight flickering on to walk you home. There's no phone in your pocket with a flashlight app you've never actually had to use until now. There's just the light leaving fast, the way it always does near the equator, and a forest going from a place you understand to a place you don't, one shadow at a time. Somewhere out there, something with better night vision than you, sharper hearing than you, and a body built specifically for hunting in conditions you can barely function in, is waking up. You start walking faster. You don't decide to, your legs just do it. This is the story of why humans are afraid of the dark, and the evidence for where that fear actually comes from is far older and far stranger than ghost stories. Here's the trap most people fall into when they think about fear of the dark. They assume it's basically superstition with extra steps. Something we picked up from campfire stories, horror movies, that one terrifying babysitter detail from childhood. Kids grow out of it, the thinking goes. Once they learn there's nothing actually in the closet, fear of the dark is treated as a glitch, an irrational holdover from an overactive imagination, not a real, calibrated response to anything. But here's the question that framing completely fails to ask. Why does that specific glitch show up independently in basically every human culture that has ever existed, often before a child has ever heard a ghost story at all? Why does it follow a remarkably consistent developmental timeline across continents that had zero contact with each other? And why, when researchers actually go looking for what's happening in the brain and body during that fear, do they find a system that looks less like superstition and a lot more like an alarm that used to have a very real reason to go off? The real question this video is built around isn't why are we scared of nothing, it's what exactly were humans so consistently right to be scared of for so long that the fear got built into the architecture. Because once you start looking at what actually happened to humans after dark for most of our species' existence, irrational stops being the right word. To understand where this fear actually comes from, you have to start with a piece of hardware most people never think about. Your eyes were never built for the dark in the first place. Human vision runs on two types of photoreceptor cells packed into the retina, rods and cones. Cones handle color and fine detail, but they need a reasonable amount of light to function at all, which is why color essentially disappears the moment a room gets dim enough. Rods are more light sensitive and handle low light vision, but they're slow to switch on. It takes a human eye roughly 20 to 30 minutes of sitting in darkness before night vision is anywhere close to fully active, a process called dark adaptation. And even at full adaptation, human night vision is genuinely mediocre. Compare that to something like a lion or a leopard, whose eyes contain a reflective layer behind the retina called the tapetum lucidum, the same structure that makes a cat's eyes seem to glow in headlights, which essentially gives the eye a second pass at any available light. Big cats can see meaningfully well in conditions where a human is functionally blind. So here's the uncomfortable starting point. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, the moment the sun went down, you weren't dealing with reduced visibility. You were dealing with a near-total sensory handicap while sharing the landscape with animals specifically built to exploit exactly that handicap. Predation pressure shaped human evolution for millions of years, and the relevant predators, big cats especially, are disproportionately crepuscular or fully nocturnal hunters, most active at dawn, dusk, and through the night, specifically because that's when their sensory advantage over prey is largest. In other words, darkness wasn't scary because of what might be in it. Darkness was scary because it was the precise window in each 24-hour cycle when the balance of power between humans and their most dangerous predators flipped hardest against humans. And that's not ancient history. In the abstract, it's recent enough and well documented enough that the evidence trail isn't subtle at all. But here's where it gets interesting. The single biggest technological turning point in this entire story is fire, specifically the moment humans stopped just using fire opportunistically and started controlling it. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, archaeologists have found burned bone fragments and ash deposits dating back roughly 1 million years, among the oldest strong evidence anywhere for controlled fire use by early humans. That date matters enormously because it sits long before Homo sapiens existed. This is something an earlier human ancestor figured out, and once it existed, it never really left the toolkit again. Think about what fire actually solved. It wasn't just warmth, and it wasn't just cooking, although both of those mattered. Fire solved the exact sensory handicap built into human eyes. It pushed back the one specific condition under which humans were most vulnerable. A controlled fire at the edge of a sleeping group did two things simultaneously. It let humans see a meaningful radius around themselves in conditions where they otherwise couldn't see their own hand, and it actively deterred most large predators who were generally wary of open flame. Some researchers studying the shift in early human sleep and social patterns have argued that controlled fire may have been one of the key enablers of safer group sleep on open ground, rather than exclusively in trees or easily defended rock. Shelters, a genuinely massive shift in how and where humans could exist after dark. So the oldest technology, specifically built to manage the dark, is also one of the oldest technologies, period.
That's not a coincidence.
That's a species spending a literal million years engineering its way around one specific recurring vulnerability. And we have direct fossil evidence that the threat fire was solving wasn't hypothetical. The Taung Child, a roughly 2.8 million-year-old Australopithecus africanus skull discovered in South Africa, shows puncture marks on the skull consistent with talon damage. Researchers have argued it was likely killed by a large bird of prey, an early ancestor on the actual literal menu. Separately, cave sites across Africa and Eurasia show clear evidence of large carnivores, lions, leopards, hyenas, denning in or repeatedly using the same caves and rock shelters that early humans also used, sometimes in alternating periods, sometimes with skeletal evidence suggesting direct conflict over the same shelter. This wasn't a one-off threat. This was a recurring structural feature of the environment. Humans and large nocturnal predators competing for the same limited safe real estate, generation after generation, and the cultural fingerprint this left behind is remarkably consistent. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe Lamashtu, a demon believed to specifically threaten people, and especially infants, during the night. Ancient Greek folklore is full of nocturnal threats. Empusa, said to stalk travelers after dark. Sub-Saharan African oral traditions across dozens of unrelated language groups independently developed warnings against traveling alone after sunset. Scandinavian folklore developed an entire ecosystem of nocturnal threats specific to darkness and isolation. Independent cultures, separated by oceans with no shared contact, and in some cases thousands of years between them, kept arriving at strikingly similar conclusions. Darkness is when the danger comes.
That's not what cultural borrowing looks like.
That's what convergent psychology looks like. Different societies independently encoding the same underlying threat. Now apply that same pattern to individual human development.
And it gets stranger because you don't actually need culture to manufacture this fear in the first place.
Developmental psychologists studying childhood fears have consistently found that fear of the dark, along with fear of separation from caregivers, emerges extremely early, generally identifiable by around age 2, and tends to peak somewhere in the preschool years, well before most children have been deliberately exposed to frightening stories or media. Multiple studies tracking fear development across cultures find this same rough age window showing up again and again, independent of how permissive or strict a given culture is about exposing kids to scary content. If fear of the dark were purely a learned response to specific stories, you'd expect far more variation in when and how intensely it shows up. Instead, you get something that looks much much more like a system switching on, roughly on schedule, the same way object permanence or language acquisition switch on. Here's where the actual mechanism comes into focus. Neuroscientists have found that the amygdala, that almond-shaped threat detection structure sitting deep in your brain, becomes measurably more reactive in low visibility and low light conditions,
even when nothing in the environment has actually changed except the lighting.
Functional imaging studies on fear responses consistently show heightened amygdala activation when visual information is degraded or ambiguous compared to identical scenarios under full visibility. Your brain isn't waiting for evidence of a threat in the dark. It's treating the absence of evidence as the threat. There's an elegant evolutionary explanation for why a system would be built that way, called error management theory. The logic goes like this. Imagine two kinds of mistakes a prehistoric brain could make in a shadowy, ambiguous situation. Mistake 1. You assume there's a predator nearby. There isn't, and you've wasted some energy being needlessly alert for a few minutes.
Mildly annoying.
Mistake 2. You assume there's nothing there and there actually is a predator, and that mistake costs you your life permanently with zero opportunity to learn from it for next time. When the cost of those two mistakes is that lopsided, natural selection doesn't favor brains that are accurate. It favors brains that are paranoid because being needlessly jumpy 1,000 times costs almost nothing, and being wrong once fatally removes you from the gene pool entirely. Your amygdala spiking at a shadow that turns out to be nothing isn't a malfunction. It's the system working exactly as designed, optimized across a brutal cost-benefit calculation that got run silently across hundreds of thousands of generations. Now apply that same wiring to modern adults, the ones reading this with every actual nocturnal predator solved out of their environment centuries ago. Surveys on adult fears consistently find that fear of the dark, or at least elevated anxiety in dark or unfamiliar low-light settings, remains common well into adulthood, showing up in clinical literature as nyctophobia in its more severe form, and as ordinary mild unease in a much larger share of the population who would never call it a phobia at all. Most of these people have never been anywhere near a predator capable of killing them. Most of them live in homes with locks, alarm systems, and streetlights outside, and the system still fires anyway. That's the part that should stop you for a second, because it means the alarm was never really about the dark itself. But here's the question that should be sitting quietly in the back of your mind by now. Darkness by itself can't hurt you. The absence of photons hitting your retina is not mechanically a threat. A shadow has never once killed anyone by being a shadow. So if the fear isn't really about darkness, what is it actually about? The honest answer is uncertainty. Specifically, the sudden, total collapse of your most trusted sense. A large share of the sensory information your brain typically uses to assess a situation comes through vision. Take that away, and you're not just seeing less. You're running on a drastically smaller, lower quality stream of information. While your threat detection system, the one we just spent several minutes establishing is built to assume the worst, gets handed an almost empty form and told to fill in the blanks anyway. Every rustle becomes ambiguous. Every distant sound could be anything. In full daylight, a snapped twig is just a snapped twig because your eyes immediately confirm or deny what caused it. In the dark, that same snapped twig stays unresolved, and an unresolved threat to a brain built the way yours is doesn't get filed as probably nothing, gets filed as still active, keep monitoring, which means the fear of the dark was never really fear of the dark at all. It was fear of not knowing, wearing the dark as its costume, because the dark was simply the most reliable, recurring way that not knowing showed up, night after night, for the entire span of human evolutionary history. Now, let's pause and give the skeptic in the room their due, because there's a real, fair objection here. If this fear is purely an ancient evolutionary leftover, why does its specific content look so culturally varied? Mesopotamian night demons, Scandinavian forest threats, modern horror movie monsters. These are clearly shaped by culture, not biology. A kid in one country might picture a specific creature under the bed that a kid in another country would never imagine. That's a fair point, and it deserves respect. Here's the honest distinction. Though culture appears to shape the content of the fear, what specifically you imagine is out there, far more than it shapes the existence or intensity of the underlying alarm system itself. The readiness to be afraid in dark, ambiguous, low-information conditions shows up reliably across cultures and across early childhood, regardless of specific exposure. What fills in the blank once that alarm fires is almost entirely local, shaped by whatever stories, predators, or dangers a specific culture has historically needed to warn its children about. So the skeptic is right that the content is cultural. But the architecture, the fact that there's a blank to be filled in the first place, and that darkness specifically is what triggers the search for something to fill it. That part shows up far too consistently, far too early, and far too independently across unconnected societies to be explained by storytelling alone. Here's the uncomfortable part of the story, because this ancient alarm system didn't just disappear once it stopped being useful. It's still running in nearly every person alive, and it's quietly costing people more than most realize. Difficulty falling asleep in unfamiliar dark environments. The specific anxiety some people feel walking to a parked car at night in an empty lot. The reflex to check a dark room before entering it. The disproportionate unease many people report around basements, attics, and unlit hallways well into adulthood. All of it traces back to the same hardware we've been describing, running in a world that has almost entirely removed the threat it was built to manage. For a meaningful share of people, this tips over into something more disruptive. Clinical levels of nighttime anxiety that genuinely interfere with sleep, and chronic sleep disruption that carries serious, well-documented downstream effects on mental and physical health. And there's a part of this story that's easy to miss entirely. Humans have also, throughout history, deliberately exploited this exact piece of psychological hardware in each other. Curfews enforced through fear of what's out there after dark. Religious and political systems that used darkness, both literal and symbolic, as a tool of control, punishing wrongdoing by denying light, or using darkness imagery to instill obedience. Even now, after dark remains shorthand in countless cultures for danger, for being unprotected, for being somewhere you shouldn't be. Language doing the work the predators used to do, keeping the same ancient alarm activated long after the original cause for it was gone. The threat that built this system into us is extinct in most of the world, for most people. But the system itself never got the memo, and other humans figured out, a very long time ago, exactly how useful that could be. So here's where this lands when you pull all the way back. You are, right now, carrying a threat detection system that was calibrated across hundreds of thousands of years against predators that no longer exist anywhere near you. The lions are gone from your neighborhood, the leopards aren't denning in your hallway closet, and yet the architecture remains fully intact, fully operational, waiting for the one condition it was built to respond to. The moment your dominant sense goes quiet and the world becomes unresolved. This isn't a flaw you need to fix. It's not evidence that you're irrational or anxious or too sensitive for flinching at a noise in an empty house. It's evidence that you're running ancient, extremely well-tested software on hardware that, biologically, is barely different from the hardware that originally needed it. Every time you reach for a light switch without thinking about it, every time a hallway feels different at 2 a.m. than it does at 2 p.m., every time a phone screen's glow feels strangely comforting in a dark room for reasons that have nothing to do with what's actually on the screen, that's the same system, still doing its one job, still treating the absence of information as something worth investigating. The campfire at the edge of camp and the phone glowing on your nightstand are not different things wearing different costumes across 100,000 years. They're the exact same solution to the exact same problem. Push back the edge of what you can't see just enough so the oldest alarm in your skull can stand down for a few hours. You didn't inherit fear of the dark because something is wrong with you. You inherited it because, for nearly the entire history of your species, it was one of the most reliably correct fears a human being could have. So let's go back to that walk. 40,000 years ago, half a mile from the fire, the light dropping fast. You're moving faster now, not because you decided to, but because something underneath the decision-making part of you took over the second the light started failing. Your eyes, built for a daylight world, are losing their main advantage in real time. Somewhere nearby, something with a better setup for exactly this moment is starting to move. And the fire, when you finally reach it, small, bright, almost absurdly modest against the size of the dark around it, does something no other technology in your species' history had done before.
It buys back your eyes.
It turns an unresolved world back into a resolved one, just within its small circle of light, just long enough to get through the night. You sit down inside that circle. Your shoulders drop slightly for reasons you couldn't have explained then any more than you could explain it now. The dark hasn't gotten any less dark.
Nothing out there has changed.
But you can see again, just a little, and that turns out to be almost everything.
You weren't afraid of the dark.
You were afraid of not knowing. And for most of human history, that fear kept you alive long enough to invent something that could push the not knowing back, one small circle of light at a time. When's the last time darkness genuinely unsettled you, even though you knew logically there was nothing there?
Let me know in the comments.
Until then, see you soon.